Making things makes us human. From when we have started being humans, and maybe a little bit before then, we have made things with our hands. That could be anything. That could be a work of art. That could be a monument. That could be a building. That could be objects to make other objects. That could be a mess. That could be a wide variety of things, but one thing that unites our species is that we make things. We've made things throughout history. When we think about the past, we think of people living in a historical time. We read books, we look at documents, we go to an old house, but very rarely do we think about what the physical life of people was like. I think that when we learn a historic trade or craft, or maybe more importantly, when we preserve a historic trade and craft, we can look at the past and the present in a much more realistic and meaningful way. We can draw up connections to the people of the past, people who were real people, just like you or just like me, and we can draw a connection to each other. Let me start first with an example. My grandfather was a billboard artist, sign painter. This is not a career you hear about these days, but historically, this was a job a lot of people had. He would climb up scaffoldings and by hand, using a brush, would paint billboards, would paint letters, perfect letters, like out of a machine, by hand. 50 years ago, if you were to take a drive through the American landscape in your car down the road, odds are you would encounter a hand-lettered sign. Today, not so much. You're going to encounter billboards, certainly. You're going to encounter signs, certainly, but odds are they came out of a printer. The people that painted signs are going away. My grandfather is dead. People of his generation that painted signs and billboards are dead. As they die, their craft dies with them. It's one of my personal regrets I never learned to paint signs and to make letters while my grandfather was alive to teach me. I could certainly get a book and learn. I could certainly practice, and it would take a lot of practice, but there is something to be said about a folkloric way of making, a way of passed down knowledge from teacher to student, from one practitioner to another, in a long, unbroken chain of making. Let's start with thinking about this as something that we can use to unlock the past. I want to start with maybe a more radical example. Hair. Dead people's hair. This is an example of a hair wreath. This is from the museum I work at, the Northampton County Historical and Genealogical Society in Easton. Hair wreaths were a very popular and very kind of frequently made thing in the 19th century. They rose to prominence with traditions of mourning. You know, that idea of wearing black, that idea of rearranging your social calendar, that idea of this long kind of spectacle of the mourning of a loved one. This happens kind of in the broader United States and English world in the 1860s-ish. In Britain, that coincides with the death of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband. In the United States, that coincides with the American Civil War. Hair wreaths were part of that. Working in museums, hair wreaths are something that are very often treated as a bit of a curiosity. People encounter them, and honestly, people don't necessarily know what to make of them. And I count myself as one of them. You see a hair wreath, it is made of hair. It's literal hair, a dead person's hair. Again, I can't stress that enough. And you encounter it, and you look at it in a frame, and you are overcome with this sense of awe, curiosity, fear. You're grossed out. I think, though, that when you look at a hair wreath in a museum or at an antique store, or if you have one in your family's collection, when you look at it, you are missing the point entirely. I think the way to figure out what hair wreaths mean, or rather to think of them as a more meaningful thing, you have to make it yourself. And so I did, because I am a weird historian. When I set out to do this, I didn't know how to make a hair wreath. That's key here. I did what any historian would do. I researched. I looked at books. So let's start with source A, the hair wreath itself, right? You look at the hair wreath, you think about the hair wreath, you get very close to the hair wreath, you take pictures of the hair wreath, you look at it, you contemplate it, you think of it as something that someone's hands made. Then, luckily for people that want to learn hair wreaths or how to make them, or people like me that do this kind of thing, books existed to teach people how to make hair wreaths. In the 19th century, hair wreaths were made one of two ways. You could take the hair of your loved one, put it in a box, send it to a guy who was going to make it, or you could collect your loved one's hair and make a hair wreath yourself. I'm more interested in the second one. A good source for that is our friend Mark Campbell here, who wrote the Self-Instructor in the Art of Hair Work, a very long title. People in the 19th century loved really long titles. Also great facial hair. What this was is a step-by-step guide. It teaches you how to do it. So what I did was I studied the hair wreath itself, then I studied the how-to book, then I collected the various materials I would need, hair, wire, a piece of dowel to wrap the hair or wire around, and then I wish I could say I felt confident to make a piece of hair work. I didn't. There is nothing more opaque, I hope as you can notice, than a 19th century instructional text. It's really very difficult to get through. The only way to learn is to do the thing. I got my hair, I got my wire, I got my dowel, and I did the thing. You take a piece of hair, a nice kind of plate of hair, and you attach a wire to that. Really, you need kind of two slivers of wire reaching out from that hair. And then, to make a very long story even shorter, you wrap the hair around the dowel and hold it in place with the wire. This creates a sort of caterpillar-looking thing. This is for real the first piece of hair work I tried to make. Not the best thing I've ever made in my life, I will admit. It looks like this kind of deranged little caterpillar thing. Once I had done the process, made a somewhat passable piece of hair work, I then did an autopsy of it. What worked? What didn't work? Was the thing I was creating faithful to this historic process, or wasn't it? Was it recreating that process? Was it something that was at least some way close to it? I settled on, this is not great, could be better, could be worse, and began doing the thing even more. So I kept going. I kept braiding the hair, a kind of interesting sentence to say, and kept trying to recreate what it was when I saw a hair wreath, a hair-worked object. I think I'm getting somewhat close. I'd no way describe myself as a master of hair work. When I did that, though, something important clicked. And the something important is the whole reason why we should even think about preserving historic trades and crafts. When you encounter a hair wreath in a museum, and I've seen many people encounter hair wreaths in museums, there are two reactions. Reaction one, ugh, hair, dead people's hair, ah! And usually they kind of make noises in their throat. Second reaction is curiosity, mouth a bit agape, kind of startled by the thing you're looking at. Either way, people are fascinated. Hair wreaths demand a response as an artifact. They demand you to encounter them, but they're far more than a curiosity. And I would argue they are far more than the finished thing itself. When you make a piece of hair work, what you are literally doing is you are holding in your hands the hair of a deceased loved one. The process of making a hair wreath is taking that hair and slowly braiding it, or faster if you're getting better at it. But the process itself is you literally running your fingers through your dead loved one's hair. It's a process, right? What matters in this isn't the finished product. This finished product that in many museums, many collections, many people that talk about it in all sorts of places in the internet talk about it as this weird 19th century curiosity that is more about the obsession of death of the 19th century people than of it's bizarre, it's separated from our normal experience in life. But what it was allowing mourners a place to mourn, providing space in their life to make a thing with their hands, to have that time with their hands, to have that time with the last remaining body part of their loved one, to mourn, to grieve, and to let go. For us as modern people, a hair wreath is something that demands response. But for someone in the 19th century, it is not a weird curiosity. It is not something that is a disturbing fascination with death. Rather, it is a very human reaction to the reality that we will all, in fact, die. I ask, what is weirder? People in the 19th century allowing them space to mourn by making an object that is, honoring their loved one, or us in the modern world who sterilize death, who remove death from the home, who talk about death in hushed voices, who encounter death in a sterilized way. We attempt to sterilize the unsterilizable, and as a result, we lose a chunk of our humanity. But what then, right? So you might be saying, this is great, and you've figured out kind of what hair wreaths mean. Good work. This has major implications, I believe, for how we think about the past and how we think about the present. If my central thesis here, that making is something that makes us all human, is true, that's a very powerful thing. We live in this exceptionally polarized time where it is becoming increasingly more and more difficult for us to find commonality with our fellow humans. It's also becoming this time where it is becoming political. It is becoming more difficult for us to think about the past. We hold the past as this thing and we talk about it and we wage cultural wars about it, but very rarely in that do we consider that the people of the past lived full human lives. We don't get that by reading a document. We don't get that by encountering them as sterile figures in powdered wigs. We encounter that by literally getting our hands dirty. So let's talk about how we save historic practices, and then let's talk about what that could possibly mean. There are large things we can do, and there are small things we can do. A large thing we can do is we as a nation are very good at talking about the past. Again, it becomes this thing that we enshrine certain parts of our American past in certain pedestals, but we are very good at preserving what I would call tangible cultural heritage. The things we touch, buildings, objects, statues, artworks. We preserve those. We look at them, we hold them, and we consider them as these relics of the past. We are exceptionally bad at a nation as preserving our intangible cultural heritage, folklore, the way we make things, the aspects of our lives that we encounter in a somewhat real, tangible way. I'm not just talking about hair wreaths here. I'm talking about food. I'm talking about the way any of us do anything. You don't have to be an artist or a certain trained maker to make things. I guarantee you all have done it. What we need to do is allocate funds to preserve these. We as a nation are good at thinking about people that we hold on a pedestal, but in reality, we are concerned more about people who live their lives, and we hold them up as people of bronze and stone, but we are less concerned about real people and the real lives that they lived, a shared human experience. So write your congressman. Ask for money to preserve these things. Good luck, perhaps. I'm a museum person. I think there is no better existing infrastructure for the preservation of historic trades and crafts than a museum, right? Than these places that hold tangible cultural artifacts in the public trust. The infrastructure is there. For we that work in museums, that try so much in our careers to preserve the tangible realities of the past, is not there some space there to preserve the intangible, to preserve how these things were made, to preserve the ways in which people's hands moved when they made a clock, when they cooked a dish? Most certainly there must be. But this extends also to all of you, the regular people, right? We all make something. We all do. It can be art, it can be a cross stitch, it can be learning how to crochet or knit, it can be cooking food. All of that is important and is worthy of preservation. You can do it yourself. One last personal example. I grew up in the middle of Pennsylvania in an old coal mining town. The coal mine had long closed and it had become, a depressed town in which there's no major industry. The people that immigrated there in the 19th century came from broad swaths of Europe, Irish and German and Slovak and Lithuanian, Italian, all of these people that came to the same town with the promise of making a new, better American life in the coal mine. In reality, they were paid literally nothing and ended up kind of living in poverty. When I was a child, many of these towns were dotted with church festivals. And at those church festivals, you could have ethnic food, halushkis and pierogies, and you name it, it's delicious. When I was young, that food was made by old church ladies. They were old then. Now they're either very old or dead. As they die, that food dies with them. We all know that any kind of older person's recipes are not the same as the actual thing, right? There's a spark missing. What is happening is these people are dying and we are losing that food. I'm convinced when that happens, a part of the universe dies. We have let it extinguish because of our inaction. Food is a good example because it connects us all. Everyone has a special favorite meal that is in your family, a thing that is made, your mom's favorite dish, some sort of delicious baked good. Preserve it. It's a good first step. Record someone older in your family making their meal and post it on YouTube with their permission, of course. And that way, that is saved. It becomes something that we can go back to. That voice is not extinguished. That works for other elements of making as well. What I'm advocating for is not to live in the past, is not to do away with the computer, is not to do away with technology. What I am advocating for is to use the full democratic might of the technology, of the internet, of these things that connect us all, to record the world around us, the ways people make things, to think of the past as something that is today rather than something 200 years ago, to preserve it, and by preserving it, save a little part of ourselves. Because when we save that part, and when we teach that part, we are teaching a small part of our human self to other human selves. And by doing that, by making a piece of hair work, by making your mother's favorite dish, by talking about these things together, When we do that, perhaps maybe then we can all find some commonality. Perhaps then maybe we can see the humanity in ourselves. Perhaps then maybe we can see the humanity of the people of the past. This might have seemed like this would be a talk that was anti-technology, but technology is essential. Because with technology, anyone can do it. You don't have to have a university, you don't have to be a special historian. You just need a phone, you just need a camera. With the internet, everyone can be a historian. Everyone can preserve the past. Thank you.